Hello, everybody. My name is Bruce M. Dichter, and this is the second podcast after the first one, which was the Declaration of Independence and how it was torn up by Donald J. Trump. Now, we're starting with understanding clinical insanity, which Donald Trump does suffer from. He does have real, legitimate mental disease. That is unquestionable. Now, as to how and why I could make such a determination, let me explain my background. My background, I went as a retired family physician. I had to retire early when I was 47 years old. I'm now 80 because of a neuropathy that began when I was in the Navy in 1975. I was what you would call a general medical officer for CB Battalion, MCB 40. And it was when I was deployment in Okinawa that the neuropathy began. And that changed the direction of practice because the neuropathy, after I got out, began to be progressive. I had already spent a year as an emergency physician at county clinic in Los Angeles. And after leaving the Navy, I spent a year and a half as an emergency physician at Northridge Hospital. It was then that the neuropathy progressed, caused great fatigue, and I found an opportunity to go into family practice for the rest of my career. Now, the problem was it also continued to progress. And eventually in 1993, it progressed to the point at the end of 93 where I could no longer function in that type of status. And I had to retire as of January 1st. Now, there was nothing else I could do. The nature of the neuropathy was a sensory and motor peripheral neuropathy. And the sensory part of it caused excessive fatigue. I literally could not do any job in medicine. And that included, well, anything basically. I couldn't even do clerical work for that matter. So I had an active background and I just wasn't able to shut down. And I fell back on my background. Number one, I volunteered my services starting in 1979 to a fledgling hospices and the only one in our town, and remained with that. I was the medical director for 7 years. Then I had to back off as my practice got too busy. And I also was a board member. All of my services were donated. And I remained as a board member after I retired in 94. I also jump-started the bioethics committee at our local community hospital back in 1984 and was its chairman until I retired. Finally, I was also, so those items coupled with my Navy taught me a lot. It gave me experience in a way that I couldn't get anyplace else. Now, as far as the psychology part, a good family practitioner has to be pretty up on psychology because it is part of your practice. The only people you end up referring have hardcore sociopathic or psychiatric disorders to the point where they need medication with the more complex medications of today. So that's where you learn psychiatry and psychology. Now, I took 2 postgraduate seminars in the early 90s. One was on updates in psychiatry, and the other one was sexual trends in the 90s. That one I took in 92. Probably one of the most enlightening seminars I've ever had. It was done for clinicians, and it dealt with clinical situations that primary care physicians, psychologists, and marriage and family therapists would run into in their daily practice. And I found it to be incredibly useful. So that is my background. From all of these combined, put me in a position to easily diagnose Donald Trump's clinical insanity. One more thing, though, after I retired, I indulged my passion for history of all types, U.S. primarily, but as time went on, I did as well world history. And the passion for history and what I learned gave me a picture of the mental disease of various historical leaders, and it was quite interesting. Then, using periodicals to keep up, what I did was I subscribed to a number of periodicals. One is Science News, still the best periodical for anybody in any kind of science because it keeps you up to date in other fields of science other than your own in a summary, as a summary. And anything you're interested on, they give you links to go to. The next one was Smithsonian. And the Smithsonian magazine is probably one of the finest magazines, combination journals I've ever read. Following that, there was also National Geographic History, which comes out 6 times a year. And that is an incredibly fun and informative journal. And followed, of course, I also use the regular National Geographic as well. And finally, there is archaeology. Archaeology is really an interesting journal, worth reading for anybody. It's just plain interesting. And the last item, which unfortunately stopped printing 2 years ago, was something called Old News. Came as a newspaper about 7 times a year, and it was good. Now, all of these magazines, including Old News, I fact-checked myself on their articles on the internet to make sure they were straight, and they were. In fact, with Old News, there was one article that I thought they got wrong. And I found out when I fact checked it that no, they got it right. I got it wrong. So these are sources that are very reliable and hardly ever make a mistake. And by that I mean nobody's perfect. So, if a mistake pops up, what the heck? Anyway, those gave me, including history. Now, the most important part of the history was this started with the History Channel, which debuted around 1990 and 1991. It was a spin-off from the A&E network. And it was from from the History Channel in those days. I would say it lasted from when they started till about 2007. And the History Channel put out an enormous amount of documentaries about American history more than the others, but world history as well, the critical points in world history. And it was enlightening, terrific, and I learned a lot. And it was from that I learned what I'm putting in this podcast and put it into a book, which I self-published on March 1st, 2024 on Amazon.com under my name, Bruce M. Dichter, MD. It's called The Real and Unvarnished History of the U.S. of A. It's a valid book. It's information that has to be in public consciousness and has to be in the public domain. Now, none of the things in there are hidden. They're just kind of been lost to history because the amount of history is so overwhelming. But they are critical, and nothing illegal was done to obtain the information in the book and in these podcasts. Just so you know, podcasts and the book go together. The book is the basis for all of these podcasts, and 90% of what I talk about in the podcast you can find in that book. Now, the important thing, also everything, I don't want to forget this, came from public domain, period. No place else. So I just want you all to know that. It's also done, the book is done, and I'm going to try and stick to this in the podcast, objectively, the way a historian does. Although when I retired, I was a family practitioner, and truthfully, that stays with you all your life, whether you like it or not. I became a historian after that and learned in detail about all of our wars, aside from Vietnam, Korea, World War II, World War I, Civil War. Everybody knows that today. Ken Burns has revolutionized our history so that we have the straight facts. His magnificent work is terrific. And the Revolutionary War, including the recent production on the American Revolution, which also is terrific. Details are good on that. So those passions over the years, I kept thinking about it. And when, the trade towers went down in 2001, I started looking for answers as to what was going on because it was confusing. And for the first time, I could put together where the terrorists were coming from, and that was Iran. Iran supported them all. They paid them, they trained them, they provided weapons and ammunition for all of them. And then when they went and did their work, Iran would sit back and go, no, we had nothing to do with it. We're just there. We may go along with them, but they did their own thing. And the answer, of course, there is no, they didn't do their own thing. They were teamwork. And the Iranian government was the boss, period. And that's the way it's been since. And so I got to learn all about that. And I started thinking, and as time went on, I started putting it together. Then Donald Trump entered the picture in his first administration. And by then I had learned with my studies, with history, how the psyche worked of dictators. And I saw right away what he was doing. to me, it was like he was an open book. And I won't tell you how I said it because it's a little, I don't want to be off color, but I said, nuts. This is terrible. This guy's his plans are to do away with the presidency, become president or dictator for life, and turn our government into an autocracy run by billionaires. And I was shocked because nobody really saw it. And I didn't think he had a chance. I admit I could see it probable, but I said, how the hell is he going to do that here in the United States? And no way. Well, time proved me wrong. And as I followed closely with what he was doing, I knew exactly what he was doing, how he was doing it, where the support was coming from, and how he developed a control of our Congress and the Supreme Court. So by the time he finished the first term, I was extremely happy to see that Joe Biden won. And I want to say this right here, that Joe Biden was the right man for the job. Joe Biden was a terrific president. In fact, he was one of the best presidents we ever had. The morale in our country was very low because of COVID-19 and what Trump had done and the things he had done. And when Joe Biden took over, the fixes he put in were perfect. One, with the tax refunds to people of lower incomes, he boosted the morale in the whole country in such a way that the economy responded dramatically. In addition, somehow he got through a bill that allowed for infrastructure repair, and he had to fight it through a negative Congress. And the funny thing about it was that the Congress, one of the Republicans, I think it was from Minnesota or Michigan, fought against this bill, tooth and nail. And then when the bill passed and was signed in, he went home and used the bill to campaign and to tell people how well he did in Congress. Because look, all this money's coming into our state to fix bridges and other things. So all I could do was, snicker at that, and realize how phony the Republican congressmen really were. So unfortunately, the Republicans mounted a campaign to interfere with Biden in every aspect of his job. And yet he stood his ground and did the right thing, helped everything out. And when the Arab-Israeli war broke out, he did something I don't think any other president's done. He got in an airplane and flew to Israel for 7 hours just so he could see for himself with his own feet on the ground what the situation was, and then got out of there after 7 hours. When Russia invaded Ukraine, he supported the Ukrainian army with weapons and teaching how to use the weapons so they could go use them. And they did. And they used them highly effectively. So in my opinion, it's one of the rarities. Joe Biden, I had no objections to anything he did, which surprised me because most other people, you can always find some objections that annoys you. But on him, it was none. And I understood what the forces he was fighting. He was fighting from the outside and unfortunately fighting from the inside. So now came along Trump with his second administration. Sadly, the reason Joe Biden withdrew the way he did, and I'm not happy about the way the Democrats handled this, but Joe Biden had cancer of the prostate. It's one thing you learn in family practice, the medical stuff that goes on. And when I heard that, it wasn't until after he withdrew and possibly after the election was over and the Republicans had won, I was astounded. When someone has cancer, especially cancer of the prostate, you can mistake the pain as it spreads for arthritis, okay? And it is a slow-growing cancer. Cancer from Joe Biden was a slow-growing cancer of the prostate, and that interfered with his ability to campaign. Cancer is kind of like it sucks the energy out of your body. It doesn't give you anything back in return, which is why ultimately it can be fatal. And it's cancer. It's like an emotional vampire. It does. And the thing is with him and prostate going through the bones, you run out of energy. You get to the point where you just can't go any further. It's normal for cancer of the prostate that spread, okay? Very often it's diagnosed in a later stage. Why? Because people think they just got arthritis and aches and pains of age. But as it spread, it gets worse. And by the time for Joe Biden to have to quit the way he did is amazing because he got farther than anybody else would have gotten with cancer of the prostate, and nobody could figure it out about it while he was president. So His Democrats said, well, he can't do it, so he has to resign. He can't, you got a lot of BS from the Democratic Party. Look, when someone has cancer and they've got to resign from running for president because of the cancer, that's a disaster. You don't cover it up with BS. At that point, you got to tell the truth. When Joe Biden made his announcement, that should have included the fact that he was suffering from cancer of the prostate. That was stage 4, period. Okay? He could get by doing the daily work of the president, whereas Kamala Harris could do the campaigning. And the result, but he could not campaign for president. And it was too much for him because not only does it hurt all the time, it makes you tired all the time when you're aching all the time. And it's impossible to do anything. But had that been properly, had he come out, then he could have retired with respect. And more people would have voted for Kamala Harris than they did. But that's passed. And I bring that out just for now and in the future. Political parties need to remember that, okay? The truth is healing, and you don't dance around it when it's in such a serious state as it was when Biden had to resign because of his cancer. Okay, now I'm going to move on to the psychology. One thing before I start, and this I will discuss this further now as we move on, is that the Declaration of Independence, which was my first podcast, is exceedingly important. Okay, all right. Some people say it's technically not in the law. That's nonsense. Of course not. Because it is in the law. It is the heart of the law. It initiated the law. And when the Constitution was finally written up in 1787, excuse me, when the Constitution was written up, the philosophy of the Declaration of Independence was integrated into the Constitution. The two are really interconnected. It's not just one thing. You take apart the Declaration of Independence and you're taking apart the Constitution as well, and people have to understand that. And as I showed you, Donald Trump and his minions have literally destroyed the Declaration of Independence by their action. The Declaration of Independence is just a big paper that was written up in 1776. It's printed, reprinted, it's all over the place. Whether someone cuts it up and throws it out, that's no big deal because you can't destroy it unless you do what Donald Trump's done. Okay? So now we're going to move into learning about the real and clinical insanity of what Donald Trump suffers from. And it's what I call a narcissistic sociopathy personality disorder, the sociopathic personality disorder. People throw around the different names, sociopathy and psychopathy all the time. And I tried to find out myself the exact definition of each. And I found out basically they overlap in many things, but people say that in psychopathy, a person who's a psychopath kills indiscriminately and possibly personally, whereas sociopathic also has no conscience and no compassion, but they don't do their own dirty work. They're good at manipulating people, and others do their dirty work, and if they get caught, they're the ones who fall. And the sociopathic, narcissistic sociopath is able to step back and keep himself clean. That describes Trump to a T, by the way. And I'm not going to go into all those details. So let's start. And I'm going to use my own book and read some from it. And this is what the book looks like. And as I said, it's available on Amazon.com. Now, I don't like reading. I like talking. And I like teaching the few times I was able to do it. But sometimes, since it's the book I wrote and the amount of energy, it took 3.5 years. I edited it. I fact-checked it. I even designed the cover, chose the font, and not the size. I wanted it to be 6x9. Instead, it's 8.5 by 11. Now, why did that happen? I had the neuropathy. And as a result, I didn't realize that the font I was using on my manuscript didn't fit the program that Amazon used. And the only size that they could accept was 8.5 by 11. And by then the thought, I could have made it work, but I would have had to go and retype the whole manuscript on a 400-page book. And I said, the hell with that. I'm just going to publish it the way it is. And there are one thing I want to say, there are a few mistakes. I think there's some typos. Even though I edited it, went through it 3 times, I thought I got them all, but I didn't. And unfortunately, the page numbers don't match the table of contents page numbers that I made. And so the chapters match just fine. The book is fine. But when it tells you it's on page 190 to 210 or something like a chapter, you have to kind of go through the chapters around the area because it's not. Okay. But it's real. That's the only error, major one. And as I said, I was too exhausted. It took a lot of effort to write the book and do it properly. So, all right. Now, the 2 chapters I wrote on psychology and explaining it. One of the things I was always good at translating medical into English for people and patients over my years. And that was my goal when I wrote this book. I wanted to translate everything into all the psychobabble and stuff into English that everybody could understand. And it's not psychobabble, by the way. And one thing about therapists, I want to caution you, good therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists, MFTs are trained to treat their patients. Okay. Over the years, they have come up with a book called the DSM, and that's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disease. And it's been changed 4 times, so we're at the DSM-5. Now, the purpose of that DSM is to give therapists practicing, either with groups or individuals, help to make a proper diagnosis, because it's complicated when you deal with patients with psychological problems. And it's not made for public distribution or public use or to throw around the terms in public, which unfortunately people have done, especially Trump, starting with his first term and again in his second term. They're gross. They cannot describe how much they can disrupt a person's life if someone were to read one of the notes about the person. So therapists of all types are schooled not to come out and make any firm diagnosis publicly. And you saw that a lot during Trump's first term. No, they're just not. They couldn't give a straight answer. And in this case, I'm not violating confidence because Trump lives his life publicly. Okay, everybody gets to see what he does. And I'm just using how he lived publicly to show you how a professional makes a diagnosis. The diagnoses now I'm going to discuss are objective and professional and valid. Okay, the one thing I want to mention, this is it, and it's not that difficult to make when you have the data publicly in front of you. The one thing I want to make is that there's no psychological test that gives you this diagnosis. Okay, Trump talks about him. He keeps, I remember the first time he took it. Now he's up to 3 times, claims he's taken it 3 times and takes it once a year. Nonsense. There's no test that you can learn anything about pathology in someone's mental illnesses that you can do once a year. They'll make a diagnosis that says you're normal. That's BS. And one of the things people in the field have to deal with is smart individuals who understand why they're taking the test can effectively lie. And that's what they do. Makes all tests meaningless. Because, like Trump, they're smart enough to know how to lie to get around them. And a particular test he mentions in public, yes, it is a real test, but it's not used for mental disorders significantly as large as Trump's. Okay? So, in the case of Donald Trump, it's meaningless. And that's a fact. So, now I will get into it. The first chapter starts on page 197. It's chapter 36. And it says, what is narcissism and the disorders that accompany it? Now, one thing as we start, narcissism as a whole is not necessarily a medical disease, okay? It is a necessary part of our psychological background. And narcissism is someone who cares only about themselves. So what that means is the will to live is built out of narcissism, or narcissism comes out of the will to live. And it comes out of the need to raise and protect your families. Okay? Without a certain amount of narcissism, you can't do that well. So the best way to look at narcissism, so you understand it, is look at a number scale, 1 to 10, 1 to 15, it doesn't matter. But number 1 is no narcissism. Number 1 to maybe number 4, 3 is normal narcissism that we all carry with us. Beyond 4, it gets worse. And when you get to 10 or 15, however you like to think of it, it's extreme and severe to the point where people are so obviously self-interested that it controls their daily life. Dictators and presidents and politicians aren't the only ones. You see it commonly in business, you see it in all types of jobs in life. Now, what the hallmark of narcissism is that as you get older, you get worse, okay? And there is, for the severe narcissism, the narcissistic sociopathic personality disorder will continue to get worse as they go through life. This is critical and this is key because Donald Trump has reached that point, and that makes him very scary. And we'll discuss that over the next 3 podcasts so you understand it completely. And so it's untreatable. Now, why is it untreatable? We've got so many psychotropic drugs, most of which do a good job. They do have side effects, okay? But with the narcissistic sociopath, they think they are God in its extreme form. They think they know everything. They think what they think is right for everybody. They make perfect dictators because of that. Okay. And with Trump, he feels the same way about himself. Okay. What happens to them, they refuse help. Okay. Because I'm God, I don't need that medicine. Okay, that's exactly how they think. And once in a while in practice, if you give them something to take, and it can be really mild, like any of the SSRI antidepressants, they get better. And you hear about them getting better from their families. Their families say, wow, that medicine's working. Okay. If you're lucky, you get them to stay on it for 3 months. What happens is they come in one day and say, I don't need that medicine. I've stopped, or they call and tell you, I don't need that medicine. I want to let you know I stopped it. Literally, once they stop it, within a matter of days, 3, 4 days, they are right back where they were when they started taking it. Okay, there's no long-lasting effects from being on the medicine for 3 months. 0. And that's important to understand because in the end, most of them end up not taking it. Well, most of them aren't rich like Trump, okay, and come from wealthy families. Now, what happens is they are the ones that end up in prison and often homeless camps. And now I will explain why. They think, here, I will start with this. Actually, rather easier for me to read a couple of items first, and then I'll go into that. Now, some of the most important things you got to watch from to start with. Most of the things coming out of their mouth are lies. Got that? We know that well about Trump. You know it about Putin over in Russia, too, as well as the people running Iran. And there's only one way to deal with it, to keep yourself sane, okay? Because they lie all the time, the only way you can approach them is to presume that everything they say is a lie, period. No matter what you want to emotionally believe, and believe that these people are good at saying things and lying that'll satisfy you emotionally. Okay. Trying to just the one thing you have to do is only pay attention to their actions. Their actions do not lie, but their words do. To them, words and actions are disconnected. Okay. One of the problems is when they lie all the time, they don't remember who they told which lie to, and they get themselves in trouble. Now, when you get to be president of the United States, you got people behind you that'll lean on you and try and get you not to make a fool out of yourself. This doesn't work with the severe ones like Trump. Smarter ones like Putin, they virtually do not, they're in the system. Putin will not talk to the press except if it was a planned speech, in which case he reads the speech and doesn't take questions. All right. Because he knows damn well that he'll make a fool out of himself when he starts to try and deal with the press. So he then just fades in the background, and that's that. People have to take it. That's Russia. It's not the United States, at least not yet. Now, how do you do this? It's hard to describe. It is very, very difficult just to divorce yourself, take yourself out of the picture, and only look at the actions, okay? Because we all have emotional needs we want satisfied from our leaders, their president. And we have to, if we hear something designed to kind of soothe us, we have to, and admit it's a lie, then we have to step back and see what's going on behind it, because they do lie for reasons. They lie. Well, let's put it this way. They very often lie because they want people to think they're doing the right thing, while underneath they're doing the wrong thing. They're gathering power, they're doing things, and they don't want people to know what they're doing because it often is a violation of major laws. Okay. And they think they can fool people. And in many places they can and did and do. So you got to catch on to that. That's essential to understand, because if you don't, they will continue to lie while they're attacking underneath. Now, as far as this disorder goes, nobody knows the origin of it. It's unstudyable. You can't study it. Okay. Why? Well, you have to have subjects to conduct a study. And not too many parents. You want to start with children and follow them for many years. If you put out, you start looking for volunteers, I don't think there are too many parents that are going to accept the fact, oh no, my child looks like he might be a sociopath. No, I don't want anything to do with that. No, one study I know of, that had 8 individuals, and they were trying to follow them to see if they get enough positives as they grew up to make a conclusion. And out of the 8, there's a couple of borderlines, about 5 of them, but it was ridiculous. The number was too small. They just couldn't have, enough data to conclude it. And it's never been repeated because nobody will come in and tell you the truth. And as they get older, they'll lie. Okay, they lie for everything, and that destroys your study. So, and if you just randomly pick people for being normal to compare them to, well, they're still going to be normal when you're done. And the supposed abnormal ones, as I said, are going to be lies. So you won't be able to tell the difference. All right. It cannot be studied. Nothing scientifically has been found. There's no abnormality in their blood tests. There's no abnormality in their brain scans. Okay. We still don't know what the hell it is caused. All right. We can treat it, but they won't take the medicine. All right, because they won't take the medicine, they're as they get older, they deteriorate. They manipulate people. They literally are emotional vampires when they're severe. And the only thing people can do to protect themselves, at least in our societies, is to distance themselves for it. And you end up, they will drop the friendships. They will not respond to calls. They will block their calls. And that's the end of it. And as they go, as the people with the disorder goes, they will suddenly find they have no place to turn. And when they work, they can get by at jobs, but suddenly they will find themselves losing their jobs. It's kind of a severe form of alcoholism without the alcohol. They can turn to alcohol and street drugs to calm themselves down, but they lose their jobs. And that's when they start robbing and selling drugs and doing what they have to get by and end up in prison. And that's why they end up in the homeless shelters, because no one wants them around. They can't stand being around. And the reason is it becomes destructive to a normal person's health to have them around. And I can't go into that, would be a lot of detail, but it's true. And once you pick up on it, you can pick up on people like that you run into in life. It's important to know about this characteristic, and I will explain it in more detail coming on now, and mainly to understand why the narcissistic sociopathic personality disorder we need to understand, because they're so obvious that Trump was so obvious even before he was elected the first time, that you need to be able to understand them, to identify them at an earlier point in life, before they start running for Congress and presidents and senators and assemblymen. And that's important because they can get away with it and do when they get into the political circles, is why we have the troubles we have. Okay. It's like people complain about capitalism. All right. Well, there's nothing wrong with capitalism. By far the best system we've ever developed. Only problem is what people do with capitalism and what the selfish, narcissistic, sociopathic will do. In their mind, the only measure of success is the amount of money they get. Okay. And with the amount of money, they get a lot of happy times from everybody around them because I'm success. Look at all this money. I got $1 billion. That is an aspect of the disease. And the fact that someone's in a billionaire category is one warning signal to suspect that they fit this personality disorder. Okay. I will not go into that further. And so we get back to the politicians like Trump. Okay. And as you watch him behave, because he's behaving in public. Okay. And he does the same at home. these people end up divorced. Okay. Now, in public, you can see the way Trump reacts to his wife and the way she reacts to him. There's zero love and affection between. I have seen no response between them other than mechanically programmed things they're supposed to do in public. There's no emotional warmth in anything they do. Melania Trump, does she do anything to help people or make herself public? No. Okay. And whether I doubt she does anything with Donald. He's up all night putting out messages on tweet and all those other things. So it's basically that's what happens to these people. The marriage becomes a sham and they live with it because they lose too much money if they try and get divorced. Okay. And that's what happens. So you end up seeing affairs, boyfriends, girlfriends, doesn't matter. Okay. That's what happens. So now I'm going to give you a list of several things I put in this first chapter on what causes and things to look for. First and foremost, which we've talked about, they are concerned only about themselves and their own needs, but no one else. That's true, not even their family. They lie without thinking about it. True. Their only purpose is to confuse people with lies while they accomplish what they want under the table, which is actually very true. Okay, that's the only reason. Because they feel they are so smart, they see themselves as above the law. They often equate themselves with Jesus Christ or God. Got that? They have no idea that this is a delusion disconnected from reality. And that's true. Because they feel they are smarter than everyone else, they develop an abnormal and excessive sense of entitlement, causing them to take excessive amounts of money and power. They feel since they are so smart, they are entitled to take everything they want, whether they need it or not. That's important and that's critical. This feeds upon itself and leads to extreme selfishness. Now you can begin to see how the disease works. In their minds, everyone else is inferior, and they don't deserve to make anything but subsistent wages. Now, this goes back in history to the robber barons post-Civil War, and I will be getting to that in this podcast. Therefore, all the money and control should go to them and not to anyone else. All of this is delusional. This is important. All of this is delusional, and it inevitably leads to the destruction of whatever they are in control of. Absolutely true. Okay? You can look at history, you can look at countries, and we identify that leader has this personality disorder. They end up destroying things. Eventually, it all fails. But many people, economies as a result, all fail, and millions of people are killed before they're stopped. Okay? Think World War II. The only people they loosen up the pay to are the few people they feel they need to continue on to their goals. True. They are capable of seeing only two types of people. Okay? Those who do whatever they want, when they want, and everybody, the second type, are enemies. You either in the first type or they will move you into the enemy category and no longer have anything to do with you. That's one of the problems that the normal narcissists run into that ends them up in prison and in the homeless shelters. And if the friend says anything that says, hey, you're doing this wrong, they automatically shift the friend to the enemy category. As they get older, they get worse. Never better. That's important because Trump is 80 years old, and we'll get into that. Stress will make them worse and accelerate the process. When stress in their lives increases, they will break with reality and not function rationally. That is true insanity. The deterioration eventually turns into severe paranoia. However, they can go back and forth into a functional reality, even with their ongoing delusions when they're younger. That disappears as they get older. They are good at covering up their delusions, so those close to them do not or cannot perceive they live in a delusional world. If stress does not let up, they will remain in that paranoid state as a non-functional person. At this point, they are really dangerous and out of control. 95% of the people suffering from this disorder will not get into positions where they can cause real harm to people. Okay? That is because they are either in prison or homeless, sadly. They never quit. They will continue to work at developing illegal ways to get back in control and power. Okay? I don't know what Trump did between 2021 and 2025, but I can guarantee most weren't legal. Their MO, or modus operandi, never changes. It's like most criminals are the same way. They remain always in an attack mode. They have learned in life that if they continue to accuse their opposition of doing illegal things, the opposition will get so overwhelmed with confusion that they lose sight of what's going on around them. When they recover, it has taken a lot of time for them to recover and probably a lot of money to go back and recheck what they are in charge of before they can say this is all lies. In the meantime, someone like Donald J. Trump will then, with them off balance because of this, will then try and increase his control and strength illegally under the table. He uses that intentionally. The attack mode, what they do, as I said, they will accuse their opposition of doing illegal things, which the opposition, by the way, aren't doing. Okay? They're all lies. Remember, anything that comes out of their mouth is a lie. When they accuse somebody or call them a name or do anything, which Trump does every day, they're all lies, period. And you have to look at it that way. And when it's at a political, national level, yeah, you have to have people around that have to investigate that, take time and effort. Meanwhile, Trump consolidates power, starts wars, you name it, and it gets harder and harder to stop them. Okay. Now, when the opposition will get so overwhelmed with confusion that they lose sight of what is going on around them. That, unfortunately, is true. That's normal. We all are like that. That allows the narcissistic sociopath to do the same illegal acts they accuse their opponents of doing. Okay. In their minds, they think they won't get caught until it's too late to do something about it. And that's how coups come about. If they're sharp enough and develop enough connection, they pull a coup, which is short for coup d'etat, French terms, and take over governments that way. Joseph Stalin was a master at this and developed the Russian playbook for doing this. He took over 21 countries, all right? And they can't keep their mouths shut, which is interesting. That's why most of them don't talk off the cuff, or if they do, they just talk about what they want to talk about. They will not talk to press. And all, like Putin, all he talks about is pre-planned with no questions from an audience, no matter who the audience is. Okay? Now, understand that they can't keep their mouths shut is important to understand. Part of their ego disorder, the insanity, is they need to brag. Okay, this is important too. By that I mean they have an uncontrollable need to show the world how smart they are. Right? Because they are like this. It will give you a window, because they are like, it will give you a window into what they are doing and where they are going. Okay? You don't have, when they accuse somebody, you don't have to stop to look to look at the person that's been accused to see what they're doing, because the opposition will be either already doing it or will be starting to do it, and they want to keep you off balance so they can increase their control. Now, this is important. They are like this even when they know they should keep their mouths shut, okay? They know better inside, but that doesn't translate, and they just do it anyway. That's part of ego control, insanity, lack of compassion, lack of conscience. Those are things that we can see examples of, but understanding where they come from is difficult. Now we'll move on a little bit to the second chapter, which is, I'll give you the number. Now, it's chapter 51, which is Understanding the Narcissistic Personality Disorder. I'm going to tell you a story that happened to me as a junior in medical school on psychiatry. We used to meet, about half a dozen of us met weekly for a month with the chief of the department, who would talk about important topics, all right? The chief of psychiatry at UCLA in 1970 was a guy named Jolly West. And yes, his name was Jolly, all right? And he would meet with us for 3 hours, and he would give a lecture, then take a small group, and then talk about what he lectured about. One day, Jolly West announced, "Today our talk will be about the terms egosyntonia and ego-dystonia." Now, I had no idea what he was talking about. It had no more meaning to me than if he said, "Today we'll talk about what I had for dinner last night." Okay? For the next hour, I sat and listened to him talk. And in the end, I didn't understand anything more that he talked about any better than I did when he started to talk. I looked around at my classmates, and they were listening to him as if they understood everything. At this point, I felt stupid. Okay? I do not like to feel stupid. Okay? About the topic, and that scared me. And since we had a 10-minute walk to go see the patient in the inpatient unit, I decided to corral West and make him explain the two terms to me so I could understand them. I let him know up front that his lecture was as clear as mud, and I had absolutely no understanding of what he talked about for an hour. He was good about it, though. He looked at me and listened and then thought for a minute, and he said, I think I know what the problem is. And it gets right to the heart of understanding narcissistic pathology, like Donald J. Trump, and there are other disorders that it's part of, but in this one it's particularly valid. And I'll explain it the way he explained it to me. And I always thought, God, why couldn't you explain that at the beginning of the talk? It was so simple. That's professors, all right? They don't realize it. And when I talked to one of the other guys about it at the end of the 10-minute walk, I said, hey, I just asked him these questions, and now I understand it. And he just looked at me and say, as far as I'm concerned, it's all black magic. Okay. And he was looking so intently at the guy and thought in his mind, he looked like a good student. He thought it was all bullshit. Okay. But it's not bullshit. Excuse me. I don't want you to get the wrong idea. Now, the term ego dystonia and the adjective form is ego dystonic is much easier of the two to understand. And it's also treatable. The term ego refers to our conscious self, what we do, how we control ourselves during the day, things like that while we're awake. Dystonia tells us immediately, because of the way we're built, that something is suddenly disrupting our behavior and making us very unconscious and frightened in our daily life. And it causes us much stress and distress. The dys part means it is out of character with our daily behavior. And as a result, we can recognize it immediately as something wrong. And it's outside of us. It's not us, but it's coming from within us. Okay? That's easy. Now, the hard part that I had so much trouble with, I'm going to try to make it real easy for you because it's important to understand this in many things in life. And it's useful. It's a useful tool. A good example of ego dystonia is a phobia. We all know what a phobia is. It's a normal part of life. We get phobias, okay? All of a sudden, you can't go down a certain group of steps, or you can't get on an elevator and you have to use the steps suddenly. And why the heck do you do that? It can be severe to the point you need to get help, but you realize that you need help. Now, for ego syntonia, it's very, very different. In this case, the individual with it is incapable as seeing anything as being their fault. They externalize it to people in the outside world or the way a road is constructed or a building, but it's not their fault, okay? They can trip over their feet with no obstruction, but they'll blame a perfectly smooth sidewalk. Okay, that's the type of people. They're the ones that come screaming out of an accident that, what did you do? You did everything, when in fact they were the ones that caused it. All right. And they do this every day. And examples can be minor or greater. And that's to get into trouble. And people with this disorder are incapable of seeing that the disorder comes from inside themselves and always blame the others, even though they are clearly responsible. That's important to understand. Okay. That's what drives people away, because they blame everybody. For if someone doesn't call them at 2:30 when they're expected to call at 2, they'll shout at that person, even when that person's a good friend. Why did you wait? Why were you late? Why didn't you call me at 2? I was expecting your call at 2. And the other person said, well, I got diarrhea and I was stuck in the bathroom for a half hour. It doesn't register on that friend of theirs. They're saying, well, that's no excuse. You could have used the telephone in the bathroom. Okay? That's the type of people they are. And after a while, it goes to a lot of things that happen like that. That's just a gross, obvious example of what it is. And that's why people don't want to talk to them anymore. And they lose all their friends. And they have no friends. Okay? And I asked Jolly West how you get patients to accept that they have a problem and treat it. And he said, which surprised me, there's no way to treat them. You don't. And then and I was surprised. I said, what? You've got to have something. And he says the best thing they can do is try and get them through life without getting in that much trouble. But as far as to treating the disorder, no. And the only thing, and this he said, and I never found one where this happened. The only thing that might change them is if some sort of catastrophic event happens to them that severely disrupts their life. That is rare. And West said he'd only seen it once or twice in his career. And I guess when he was chief there, he was about 50. Now, again, and I emphasize this, so you're going to run into this. You can run into this in parents as they get older. You can run into this with siblings as they get old. You can run into this to your best friends and your friends as they get older. The reason why there is no treatment, period, is that they are incapable of seeing that they could do anything wrong. Always the other guy. The other guy is always in the wrong, even if you show them step by step why it was their fault and not the other person, and you push the issue, they get angry and fly off the handle, and they can even get violent and leave if you're lucky. Otherwise, they get violent and they attack you, okay? That's important to understand. That's the danger zone on individual, okay? You got to be careful when you recognize you're in with a person in life like that. Okay, you got to protect yourself because there's nothing on God's earth that you can do to help them or make them feel better. So, and as Wes said, all you can do is support them when they come in and help them get through life and hope they don't end up homeless or in jail. It is in its most serious form. People like this can get very aggressive to the point of violence and end up in prison or homeless, as I said. A few also become murderers, but then they cross the line to be psychopathic. I don't know if that's a good line or a good definition, but that's all you can say. A few, the smarter ones, learn early, or if they grow up in well-to-do families, learn early that they are good at manipulating people and find out they can get far in life by using this trait. Perfect example, Donald J. Trump. They also monopolize conversations until you can't stand being around them. That's true. They can end up in prison or homeless because they don't have friends as a result of that. Now, it's important to understand there are varying degrees to this. Okay, that's important. But the worst somehow end up as dictators. You know, if you have a number scale of 10, the dictators, including Trump, are in 11. Okay? And again, I'm repeating myself because these are important characteristics that you should try and remember. There is no treatment for this disorder because individuals like this cannot or will not accept that they have a disorder. It's the other people's fault. Me, I'm perfect. If you attempt to explain this to them, they think you are the crazy one, and then you become the enemy. And if it's a family member, it's tough, okay? You don't want to be an enemy to a parent or to a cousin or brother or sister. And again, if a person with this disorder does try the medicine, the only problem is that, first of all, few people will take the medicine to begin with. And you will see over a period of 3 to 6 months that they suddenly start becoming normal. And you don't mind, and they listen to you, and you don't mind as much being around them, okay? It's amazing change, believe me. But most of the time it ends at 3 months. Occasionally someone will get to be 6 months. Okay. And when they do stop the medicine, they immediately revert to what they were before they began the treatment. That's important. And this is true, most therapists hate to see them coming because they know that they will put out a lot of effort and energy and get very little in return in terms of helping them. They literally become addicted to their psychiatric disorder and want to live with it. I don't know how else to describe that. It happens a lot in the field, but in psychology. And as I said, the cause is unknown. And as I said, understanding it can drive you crazy. And because normal people can't believe individuals are doing this intentionally, okay? They think they're crazy, okay? Well, they are, but not that way. And as I said, people in the psych field today, they continue to argue whether this is behavior as learned or is present from birth. It is almost impossible to study. And all you can do in the end is protect yourself from being sucked in by this behavior. Sucked is the right word. Sucked in like a vacuum cleaner. And live by the same rule, sucked in. To live so you don't get sucked in, to live in their delusional world where everyone must live by the same rules and laws. You have to learn, when it gets bad, they become a dictator. They try and force everybody in their country to live exactly the same way. There's no allowing for deviation, okay? And if you deviate, you either end up in prison, or they kill you. There's no in-betweens. Now, since the narcissism in this disorder causes them to feel that they are like a king or even God or Jesus Christ, in their minds, everything they feel and say is right. Therefore, it has to be law, because if they know it's right, they got to make everybody else believe it too. They are unable or refuse to change, even though their society falls apart. Got that? There is nothing new about this. When you study history, you see this scenario happen over and over and over again. Knowledge of this, I hate to be a reader. Knowledge of this personal and societal behavior patterns is what originated the story of the phoenix bird, or the phoenix. This goes back in time immemorial. We don't know when it originated, but it goes back at least 4,000 or 5,000 years, if not longer. Strangely enough, people in the past, there were individuals, they're few and far between, but they congregated in secret groups who understood human behavior like this. And they're the ones who evolved the phoenix myth. The phoenix bird is not a myth, but it's not a bird either. Okay, there's never a bird walking around that was 10 feet tall and beautifully colored with feathers and fur. Okay, it represents every society since the dawn of time. We have finally reached a point in history where we can understand this and hopefully eliminate this problem from the world. Whether it is conscious or subconscious, people who manipulate their way into higher echelons of their field, politics, business, science even, have to have the tools to get there. The main tool is rationalization. Rationalization is a normal and necessary part of human behavior. We all do it, but it's under control. We rationalize normal things. We don't rationalize bad things. Or when you murder somebody, except for psychopaths who are serial killers, then they rationalize that they're doing the world a lot of good by killing people. Let's see, and the dictator types, they rationalize their behavior because, after all, they are God or God's emissary on earth, or Jesus Christ. Therefore, everything they believe and do is right. And again, I'm repeating myself, but this is the type of thing you have to remember the next time you listen to Donald Trump speak on the news or gives a speech that we all listen to. Now, the important thing, their rigidity blocks any other alternatives, so that the only thing that is right in the world is to force everyone to rigidly do exactly what they tell them to do. Now, this is part of that personality disorder. This is important to understand. It is abnormal. It is not normal. It also makes their belief tell them what to believe. And they can only practice a religion that they tell them to believe. Okay? And you just look at Iran. That's a classic example when religion leads to that dictatorship. And by the way, it can be religion, it can be the left, it can be the right politically, it can be the middle, from the business world. They're all the same, and they all have the same disorder. And the extremes of them end up destroying their society, whether it be communist or whether it be fascist or whether it's a religious thing. Okay, you can find plenty of examples in history when you start studying it. Now, I'm going to repeat the next item. I've talked about it already. Is about understanding if they're lying or telling the truth. Well, that's a misnomer. Okay, because they never tell the truth, and you have no choice but to accept the fact that they are lying, even if it sounds like the truth. Okay, and that takes discipline. Believe me, I've gotten caught up in things too, and I get annoyed with myself. But you're an emotional person. People are emotional beings. And when someone knows how to get you, they can get you when they're skilled. The salesmen can do that. When you go in to look at cars, whether new or used, they're very good at that. Okay? It's where you go into clothing stores, or where you go into jewelry stores, or any other type of store. Antiques, they're very good at saying the right things that manipulate you into buying it. And that's the type of thing that we're all prey to. I knew a salesman once, many years ago, and he said, the trouble with being a salesman, he said, I was a good salesman. He was older and retired at that point. He says, when you're good at sales, you're also the easiest to have someone sell you something. I said, what? You know all the tricks. He says, I don't know what it is. I never figured it out. But he says, and it's not just me, my friends, everybody, you're easy to be had by another salesman, even if you don't want the object. And he says, that's a fact of life. So maybe that's part of human nature, okay? But again, protecting yourself. How do you protect yourself? If you know you're going to listen to somebody like this, okay, like Donald J. Trump, you have to sit back and build a wall and just to listen. And when they're done, some of the things they promised, you have to step back. You can use the internet to look them up, by the way. It takes 2 minutes. Or you can write it down if you want, doesn't matter. And then look at what they've done in the past. And you know what? You'll find they never did that. Not only that, you'll find that they lied about doing that in the past. And there's 1,000 examples now of Trump doing that, especially since he took office again on 2021, on January 20th, 2021. Why? He promised no new wars. He promised the economy would get better. Okay? And in no time, we had new wars. It's only been 15 months, believe it or not. Let me think. January 20th, April 20th. It'll be February, March, April. That's 15 months. In May, it'll be 16 months on May 21st. Got that? Since May 21st, he's attacked Venezuela. He's attacked Iran. He's put us in deep caca. So that's what I mean by he lies about everything he says. And no matter what, you want your leader. You have an emotional need. It's like having a parent. You have emotional need for, in this case, your leader is your father figure. And you have an emotional need for him to be your father to take care of problems. But he doesn't. He doesn't give a damn about you. He's not your father. He's a narcissistic sociopath who considers you the enemy, believe it or not. And to him, you're an enemy, and you got to accept that. That's the real world of his existence. So, however, and autocratic leaders, by the way, I don't want to leave this out, have developed great skill in reading an individual's emotions and then using that knowledge to manipulate them, whoever they are dealing with. And once you catch on, it gets easier to see right through them. It takes a fair amount of effort to get there, believe me. And one of the easy things to do when someone like Donald J. Trump does these things and lies these things, the only way you can get to the point where you can push him back is to realize that he is trying to take away our way of life. And by that, you go back to the beginning, 250 years. It's our 250th anniversary, for God's sake. The revolution, what has held up the people during 8 years of our revolution? Okay? The Declaration of Independence, period. What has held us up after that? Our Constitution, which he has violated God knows how many times, at least 100. And what has held us together when things got worse, such as the Civil War, okay, where 600,000 people were killed, and they fought it to the end. What held them together? The belief in freedom, the belief in what we did in this country to achieve freedom, and what we have to do to hold on to it. We got through that Civil War. It was awful, an awful time, a lot of depression. Then there's smaller wars. We get to World War I, which really, we just got in to help our allies at the end. But World War II was different, okay? That led to 500,000 American deaths. And worldwide, I've seen estimates between 20 and 50 million people killed in Europe. I'm not sure what the estimate is in Asia, but it's at least that much. And that's what it takes to stop these guys, okay? When they get in so much control, they're not stoppable. They're too rigid. They cannot live outside their rigid fantasy world and delusions. And they expect everybody to live in that fantasy world and delusional world with them. So that's the key to understanding them. Now, the final thing I just want to conclude here is what goes on in their heads, okay? Fact of the matter is, I've been contemplating this a lot. Knowing I was going to do this podcast, I woke up after a dream in which I was totally confused. All the things I thought about putting in, that I did in this book, and all the things I'm going to talk about, was nothing but a mass of confusion, and that nothing interconnected. And I got really panicky. And then I woke up, and all of a sudden, that was a dream. I'm fine, and it's fine, and everything I've done is good. So that gave me a feeling and a clue for what's inside Trump's head. All right, what's buried deep down inside, and they may not be consciously aware of it, is an undercurrent of depression. This comes from the fact that they feel inferior to literally almost everyone on Earth. Why? No, we don't know why. Where does it come from? Were they born with that? Was it the way they were treated when they were growing up? We make intelligent guesses, but we don't know the answer. My impression has always been that it might be genetic. That's my own feeling. But as I said, you can't tell. So what goes on in their head? There's first depression and the inferiority feelings, and underneath it all, it produces fear and paranoia. Okay, and the fear and the paranoia is so strong that they end up going into this delusion and fantasy world where they're not paranoid, they're not fear, and they don't get depressed. This is critical to understand to some extent. Can't be proven. It's my opinion. I admit it. But my instincts tell me it's on the right track. Sorry, I'm getting to the end of I can't talk much longer, but I want to cover one thing. And they discover something important. When they get involved in a war, their depression and their fear seems to go away. They're heroes in that strange world they live in. And they like that. And they don't want to quit because it makes them feel better. So what you do next, they do next, is they've got to get back to they don't like being depressed once the war is over, or there is no war. So what they will then do is look for a way to have a war again. And what they do is they'll turn one of their enemies, one of their neighbors, into enemies and come up with reasons why they have to be attacked. This is classic Adolf Hitler strategy. He started with Austria and Czechoslovakia, after which, hey, this is pretty cool. Then he attacked Poland to start World War II in September of 1939. And once they get caught up in this, and their euphoria they get from this is abnormal, delusional, and fantasy, and they keep going. They keep finding people to attack. And that's the worst part of the disease. That's a danger point. Okay, by then they've gone over the edge and they exist solely in the fantasy world with the rules that they enforce upon the people they govern. Okay, Donald Trump, the scariest thing about Donald Trump, because at this point, there's no stopping them. If you stop one war, they will use the governmental powers to start another one. And this is where Donald Trump is now, in which I find the scariest thing of all, because he is advancing. When he took over 15 months ago, no more wars. We're done. Okay. Right. Okay. When he started with Iran, well, we're just showing them what'll happen if they don't stop. Wrong. He just started it up and kept it going and has continued now for 10 weeks. It gives him gratification, believe it or not. That's what's part of the reason underneath them for war. And they want to keep it going. They will not negotiate. They will not do anything. In their minds, they are strong enough. And because they think of themselves, the leader, as God, then all he has to do is get his people fired up and they're going to do all the work for him and they will conquer everybody. That, of course, is delusional. It is kind of fantastical. It's a fantasy. It's all of that. And in the end, they lose. And the bad ones, like Hitler, end up dead. Tojo in Japan executed. Hitler had himself shot by one of his aides because he didn't have the courage to drink poison. Okay? The others, because we were semi-friends with Russia, Stalin having been on our side, we couldn't do much with some of the things he did. However, he did try and spread the communistic influence into Greece and Iran in 1947. He was stopped by the Truman Doctrine by 1948, after which he was angry and just turned his nose up, withdrew to Russia, and out of that came the so-called Iron Curtain. Okay? That's what happens, like you're playing with somebody who wants to do everything their way and you don't do it. And they own the ball. They say, well, I'm not going to play anymore. And they take their ball and go home. And you all find something else to do. It's kind of an evolution of that type of behavior, I think. Stalin wanted to spread communism over the world. But when he was stopped, he says, I'm going to take my ball and go home. And of course, his ball was interacting with the rest of the world and all the positive things we do in life. There was nothing positive about the government that Stalin developed. It was all severe autocratic dictatorship. And we're still dealing with that today. So at this point, I am going to close this podcast. And I'll finish this with the next one, and then we'll go on to the dictators, the major ones. And you will understand, I hope better, by my experience in history. And the last thing I want to say is that although I'm a physician and a family practitioner, life's experience I've had means a lot. And that has helped me do what I do. And I will be able to explain that to you and how it relates. It's amazing how simple it is. Now, the one thing I do want to tell you is the three basic things that allow me to do this with expertise is one, archaeology and history, knowing those subjects very well. Other, understanding human behavior, both normal and abnormal as well. Then finally, science of our genetics. That came from Science News, who keep up every couple of years with a review of where we're at genetically. And I'm going to remind you of this. It's important to understand. Research has shown using high-speed computers, and it's done all over the world, the free world. It's a teamwork effort. Western Europe, Sweden, Japan, India. I don't want, if I left someone else out, I apologize. And so all of this has shown one of the most interesting things. It is an amazing scientific breakthrough. And that is more of our personalities are inscribed in our DNA than we thought. Now, what the percentage is, I don't think has been proven yet. I haven't seen any evidence of it. But just the fact that our DNA can control is our personalities and type of person we are is built into our DNA. It's like our hard drive, and you don't change it. And just knowing that changes everything. It changes everything when analyzing subjects like this, because are they born like this, or does life's events make them like this? Okay. Well, guess what? It's still someplace in the between. And people have argued about this for centuries. And that's about it. And it just dawned on me that I forgot to finish out with the phoenix bird. Sum it up quickly. The phoenix bird lives for a certain amount of time. It then all of a sudden explodes and turns into a pile of dust. At the bottom is a egg. That egg's cleaned up and removed, and eventually it cracks and grows up into another phoenix bird, and the same thing is repeated. Well, the phoenix bird represents our society, and they start often with wanting to improve the rights of man and all those things. But something happens, and it fails, and the bird explodes, and you're nothing left but dust. But there's one more egg, and the egg gets moved away, and at some future point, that egg hatches into a new phoenix, except that it's not a phoenix. It represents a society. Maybe it hatches into another more advanced society. Who knows? But the same process repeats itself, and it causes the bird to explode into a pile of dust, gray ashen dust. Always, though, the egg survives. Our purpose at some point, as we have evolved in our society, we're slowly getting the purpose where we can nourish the phoenix, which is representative of us and our society, so that it doesn't deteriorate and explode. And we can continue on and begin to evolve further on in the positive direction we're supposed to go. And I just want you to, sorry I forgot to add that. It took more time to add that in. So thank you. And you'll hear from me soon, probably tomorrow. I'll do the next podcast.